Hey guys, tonight we slip into a part of American history that starts quietly, soft footsteps down a dim hallway, and then suddenly, before you know it, you're staring at a country trying very hard not to tear itself apart. You float above a landscape still smelling of wood smoke and fresh-cut timber, where 13 former colonies have turned themselves into a growing nation, but one whose seams already creak. You scan the countryside, sensing a tension so thick it could double as one of those weighted blankets people swear by. And honestly, you probably won't survive this emotionally, because the mood swings of early 19th century America are wild. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's, as always, fun seeing where this sleepy little history crew is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift straight into 1819, and right away you feel how jumpy everything is. You re-walking a dusty road through a young United States that is trying very hard to pretend everything is fine. On the surface, the country feels hopeful, cities growing, frontier pushing west, but underneath, little cracks start whispering. You hear one of them the moment you overhear arguments about Missouri. Yes, Missouri, quietly applying for statehood like it's just another item on the national to-do list, except it's not. It triggers the question nobody wants to face. Should new states be free or slave? You stand in the middle of Congress, listening as representatives panic like people trying to defuse a bomb using instructions written in crayon. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 finally slides into place. Missouri slave, Maine free, and a neat line drawn across the map like a parent separating siblings in the backseat of a car. And that's your mainstream fact for this section. The Missouri Compromise really was meant to preserve balance between free and slave states. But as you feel the political air settle, you also sense that it's only pretending to calm down. Someone just shoved all the messy stuff under the couch. You step back outside and wander through towns where people read newspapers the way we scroll doom feeds today. Everyone's got opinions. Everyone's sure the other side is overreacting. You overhear farmers complaining about tariffs they swear are designed by evil geniuses, merchants worrying about markets, and politicians muttering through clenched teeth. And then the panic of 1819 hits America's first major financial crisis, and the nation collectively screams into a pillow. You watch as banks collapse, people lose farms, and the sense of national optimism takes a nosedive worthy of a roller coaster that absolutely failed all safety inspections. As you walk through the chaos, you catch a quirky tidbit. Some panicked citizens genuinely blamed the entire crisis on moral decline, which, depending on who you asked, could mean anything from gambling to dancing too enthusiastically at harvest festivals. Yes, dancing, that's the hill they chose. But underneath the jokes and the panic, you feel something heavier. North and South begin seeing each other with narrowed eyes. The North mutters about the slave power, imagining Southern elites scheming like mustached-whirling villains. The South whispers that the North wants to control them, reshape them, erase their way of life. Every conversation feels like a bad group chat where everyone assumes the worst intentions. You keep walking, following that uneasy line across fields and rivers as the 1820s unfold. You pass factories rising along northern rivers, brick boxes humming with machinery, teenage workers, and the occasional argument about whether the machines are too loud or just loud enough to drown out existential dread. You sense how industrialization changes everything: money, politics, and even how sections of the country define themselves. The North leans into speed, change, and commerce. The South doubles down on plantations and slave labor. Two identities are forming like tectonic plates grinding on each other. Along your path, you hear distant shouts from Congress again, leaders wrestling over tariffs. Especially the tariff of abominations in 1828, which the South hates with the kind of passion usually reserved for bad sequels. You feel yourself pulled into the nullification crisis, watching South Carolina threaten to ignore federal law entirely. For a moment, you actually feel the room tilt, as if the country might crack right then and there. Andrew Jackson, never known for subtlety, basically tells South Carolina, "Try it and see what happens," which is presidential energy you can only describe as aggressively caffeinated. Historians still argue whether that standoff was a genuine step toward disunion or just political theater performed by men who really needed hobbies. From your vantage point, it feels like both. You sense that every crisis leaves a scar. Nothing fully heals. You move west, where settlers push into new territories that stretch farther than most people's imaginations. You see wagons creaking across plains, families dreaming of fresh starts, and politicians back east scrambling to figure out whether those regions will tip the balance again. Everything is connected, every little territory a chess piece, and you're watching the board get more cluttered by the year. As the late 1820s slide into the 1830s, you pick up on something subtler, cultural identity splitting along invisible lines. In the North, newspapers talk of modernization, progress, and wages. In the South, plantation elites insist their system is stable, natural, and ordained. Each side writes its own story, and the stories do not match. You feel the emotional distance widening like siblings who live in the same house but want to admit they are not friends anymore. You pause on a riverbank where a steamboat churns by, smoke trailing into the sky like a warning signal no one quite interprets correctly. Someone nearby mutters that America is too big, too different, too loud to stay united forever. You want to joke that they should give it at least 60 more years before deciding that, but the mood is too somber. Everywhere you drift, you sense a country holding its breath. No single event screams civil war incoming. Instead, dozens of moments whisper it. A compromise here, a crisis there, a heated newspaper editorial, a preacher's sermon, a tariff debate, a duel, because of course there are duels, it all stacks slowly, quietly, relentlessly. And as you leave the 1830s behind, feeling that early tensions settle into something more permanent, you know the firewood has been neatly arranged. All it needs now is a spark. You step forward into the 1830s and 1840s, and the air around you feels heavier, like the atmosphere right before a summer storm, when the sky pretends it's fine even though every cloud is giving side-eye. You wander into a nation where the ground may look solid, but you can feel the tremors deep under your feet. You're walking through bustling northern streets, now dodging factory carts and listening to workers complain that the machines are too fast, the hours too long, and the boss is too cranky, which honestly could be ripped straight out of a modern group chat. Everything hums, everything moves, everything accelerates. The North is sprinting into the industrial age like it wants to win a prize. As you drift along these factory-lined roads, you absorb the mainstream fact tucked neatly into the rumbling noise. By the 1840s, the North had become the industrial and population powerhouse of the United States, outpacing the plantation-based South. Immigration surges, cities balloon, and steam whistles scream across the landscape like caffeinated alarm clocks. You walk past newspaper stands stacked with fresh issues debating tariffs, labor conditions, and politics. Everyone has a take. Everyone thinks their take is the correct one. You feel the temperature of public opinion warming degree by degree, but then the scenery shifts. You blink and suddenly you re-gliding over sprawling southern cotton fields, wave after wave of white fluff under a blazing sun. The rhythm is slower here, steadier, built on plantation systems and enslaved labor. You watch wealthy planters polish their pride the way some people polish classic cars, lovingly, obsessively, and with total denial that anything could ever go wrong. The South sees cotton as its crown jewel, convinced the world can't live without it. King Cotton, the newspapers call it. And with cotton profits soaring, many Southern leaders double down on their belief that their system will last forever. You sigh, because you know how this all plays out. But they don't. You wander between these two worlds, feeling the contrast grow sharper by the month. North and South aren't just disagreeing, they're becoming different planets orbiting the same sun, pretending the gravitational pull won't eventually snap. You overhear arguments about slavery that escalate fast. Some Northerners grow louder about abolition, waving pamphlets and moral outrage. Many Southerners push back harder, insisting that criticism of slavery is an attack on their rights, their livelihoods, and their honor. Honor, you quickly learn, is a word the 19th century uses the way we use Wi-Fi. Always relevant, always dramatic, occasionally causing fights in public spaces. Historians still argue whether this rise in abolitionist activism actually fueled Southern paranoia, or simply exposed fears that were already there. Listening in from your floating vantage point, it feels like a bit of both. Every moral argument becomes personal. Every accusation becomes a threat. You almost want to hand everyone some chamomile tea and a long nap, but alas, history rarely chooses the peaceful option. You drift westward again, drawn by movement and dust. The countryside opens into enormous frontiers where wagon wheels creak, campfires crackle, and families chase dreams of land and opportunity. And right here, under the endless sky of the expanding West, is where you feel the firewood piling higher and higher. Because every new territory asks the same question, nobody wants to answer. Will this place allow slavery or not? Even the land itself becomes political. You follow settlers across the continent as the idea of manifest destiny spreads like a catchy but problematic TikTok audio, everyone repeating it, not quite realizing how complicated it is. Americans feel destined to stretch from ocean to ocean. You get it, the landscapes are stunning. But expansion means new states, new balances, new reasons for North and South to argue, and the arguments get petty fast. Think territory-level subtweeting. Then you stumble into the Mexican-American War of the 1840s. Cannons boom in the distance, soldiers march, and you sense how this conflict, victorious for the U.S., unlocks a massive new land jackpot: the West. California, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, Wyoming, and more territories so vast you could get lost for a lifetime inside them. A quirky tidbit floats by on the wind. Some soldiers joked they'd won a desert big enough to bury Congress. S ability to compromise, which, considering what comes next, feels a little too on the nose. You drift through Congress again, where politicians now argue louder than ever about what to do with these new lands. The 1840s are one long group project with 20 people and zero teamwork. The Wilmot Proviso tries to ban slavery in new territories. Southerners shut it down like a door slammed during an argument. Northern free soilers shout about free labor. Southern fire eaters accuse them of existential threats. Each side listens only to talk, never to understand. The Compromise of 1850 finally arrives, dragged into existence like a reluctant cat at bath time. It throws California into the Union as a free state, strengthens the Fugitive Slave Act, and tries to soothe everyone with half measures. From your floating perch, the whole thing looks like someone patched a leaky ship by slapping stickers over the holes and saying, "They're fixed forever." But the Fugitive Slave Act, this is where you feel a shift in the nation's heartbeat. You watch enslaved people running north, breathless and terrified, hoping to cross that invisible line into freedom. And then you watch northern citizens forced by federal law to help capture them, even in places where the community wants no part of it. You feel the moral friction heat your skin. The North feels violated. The South feels validated. Fear spreads, resistance grows, and trust continues its steady, painful collapse. You wander through small towns where new technologies accelerate everything. The telegraph clicking like an anxious typist, railroads carving scars across the land, newspapers spreading stories faster than people can argue about them. Communication shrinks, misunderstandings grow. You sense the mid-19th century version of going viral rumors, flying from city to city before anyone can fact-check them. Some towns swear abolitionists plan uprisings. Others believe Southern militias lurk behind every barn door. Nobody sleeps well. Except you, listener. Hopefully, you glide into 1852, brushing against a phenomenon few expected. A novel Uncle Tom's Cabin sells like wildfire and makes people angrier than the internet makes people today. Southerners ban it, Northerners quote it, and suddenly fiction becomes political dynamite. You shake your head because, truly, try telling a modern book club that a novel helped push the nation toward war and watch them slowly put down their iced lattes. The 1840s and early 1850s throb with momentum, none of it good. Every debate, every law, every new piece of land becomes another log tossed onto an already enormous pile. Industry rises, cotton spreads, arguments flare, and the emotional divide between North and South grows so wide you could drive a train through it, and honestly, many do. And as you stand between the two regions, feeling the tension pulse like a distant drumbeat, the firewood is no longer just stacked. It's towering. One spark is all it will take. You drift into the mid-1850s without even noticing the boundary between years. The road just stretches on, and suddenly the sunlight feels harsher. The quiet you felt earlier has vanished, replaced by a low, simmering growl humming through the nation like a distant engine that nobody knows how to shut off. You're walking along a dusty track in Kansas now, and the wind is full of grit-sharp hot and carrying the unmistakable smell of trouble. It's here, in these wide-open plains, that the fault lines finally stop whispering and start screaming. You watch settlers roll in by the wagon load, each family convinced they're part of a peaceful frontier story. But instead, you re-stepping into one of the most chaotic choose-your-own-nightmare chapters of U.S. history. Kansas is supposed to vote on whether it'll be free or slave, thanks to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, your mainstream fact. It effectively overturned the Missouri Compromise line by letting settlers themselves decide. In theory, this sounds democratic. In practice, it's like handing out lit matches at a gas leak. You float above the towns as armed groups flood into the territory pro-slavery border ruffians from Missouri on one side, anti-slavery settlers from New England on the other. They glare across muddy streets, build makeshift forts, and occasionally try to debate with rifles instead of words. You hear shouting, breaking glass, and the kind of political insults that would definitely get someone banned from a modern comment section. Historians still argue whether the violence in Kansas was a true preview of the Civil War or just its own isolated brushfire. But from where you hover, watching homes burn and towns fracture, it feels like a rehearsal nobody wanted. You drift into Lawrence, Kansas, just in time to witness the town attacked for being too anti-slavery. Gunshots echo. Smoke curls into the sky. Then, just days later, you follow a gaunt man with fierce eyes, John Brown, through a moonlit night as he leads his sons to retaliate at Pottawatomie Creek. Steel flashes, shouts erupt, and the entire territory plunges deeper into chaos. You flinch, wishing you could soften the moment, but history refuses to be gentle. This is bleeding Kansas, and the land itself seems to wince with every confrontation. You back away slowly, hoping the tension eases as you head east. It does not. Your steps carry you into the U.S. Senate chamber, one of the places you'd expect rational debate, or at least mildly spicy conversation. Instead, you arrive just in time to see Representative Preston Brooks beat Senator Charles Sumner with a cane after Sumner insults his cousin. A cane. In the Senate. You blink twice because even for the 1850s this feels excessive. Newspapers explode with outrage and admiration, depending on which region is reading. Southerners send Brooks replacement canes engraved with phrases like, "Hit him again," while Northerners react like the apocalypse just started. You sigh, realizing you've officially reached the part of the decade where people treat violence like it is part of normal political engagement. It's peak "we are not okay" energy. You slip onto a train headed westward again, clicking past farmlands and cities. The ride is loud, busy, stuffed with people debating everything except how to calm down. You overhear one passenger claiming Kansas is proof that the North is launching an invasion of fanatics. Another swears the South is plotting to spread slavery across the entire continent, maybe even into Cuba. A quirky tidbit pops up here. Some U.S. politicians genuinely fantasized about annexing parts of Central America as new slave territories. Yes, someone really woke up one day and said, you know what would help? Nicaragua. You hop off the train and step into the Supreme Court chamber, where tension drips from the marble like cold sweat. The Dred Scott decision of 1857 lands with a thud that shakes the country. Chief Justice Roger Taney rules that Black Americans free or enslaved cannot be citizens, and that Congress has no right to ban slavery in the territories. The room goes silent. Then the nation explodes. Southerners cheer. Northerners recoil. Free Black communities across the country feel the floor drop beneath them. You feel it too, like gravity tilting. Historians still debate whether Taney intended to settle the slavery question forever, or simply inflamed it to an irreversible degree. Judging by the way you feel your heartbeat spike, it's definitely the latter. You wander into Chicago next, where a tall, lanky lawyer named Abraham Lincoln paces behind a podium. His voice is steady, thoughtful, and filled with an unease you can practically taste. When he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," you feel the words ripple outward like a deep bell toll. People stop, listen, worry. Lincoln isn't predicting doom, he's diagnosing it. And you, floating there above the crowd, sense the country leaning closer to fracture with each syllable he speaks. You travel south afterward, past cotton fields and swamps, where plantation owners gather on porches lit by flickering lamps. They're angry, defensive, and convinced the North has declared ideological war on them. Many fear that abolitionists hide behind every fence post waiting to spark revolts. And while their paranoia is exaggerated, you can't deny the tension tightening around their conversations. They speak in grim tones about Northern aggression, about states' rights, about honor. That word again honor haunting every frontier and parlor room. shaping decisions the way gravity shapes rivers. You drift into towns where the Underground Railroad pulses with secret, urgent life. You watch as brave men and women guide fleeing slaves through forests, barns, and shadowy paths toward freedom. Lanterns wink like stars close to the ground. You hear whispers, the soft rustle of footsteps, the sharp snap of a twig that freezes everyone in place. You feel how dangerous this work is, how every mile north is a gamble. Then you float east and enter a small schoolhouse where a former slave named Frederick Douglass speaks to a packed crowd. His voice is powerful, fierce, steady. People hang on every word. The room vibrates with emotion. Someone in the back weeps quietly. You see the ripple effect of his speeches, how they ignite hope in some hearts and terror in others. As you move into 1858, you follow Lincoln again, this time debating Stephen Douglas across Illinois. The crowds cheer, heckle, laugh, argue, and occasionally bring snacks. A fun tidbit: one observer swore a debate child ate 5 apples, 2 biscuits, and a slice of pie before the candidates even finished opening statements. But beneath the entertainment value, these debates drag the slavery question into the center of national life. There's no pretending anymore. Everyone is talking about it. Your final steps in this section carry you into 1859, where you stand before the arsenal at Harper's Ferry. The night is cold. The moon is thin. John Brown reappears, older now, determined, blazing with a conviction that burns almost too bright. He launches a raid meant to trigger a nationwide slave uprising. It fails. Soldiers storm the building. Brown is captured, tried, executed. But his actions, wild, violent, deeply polarizing, send shockwaves through the country. The North sees a martyr. The South sees a terrorist. The center collapses a little more. And as you leave the gallows behind, drifting upward into the trembling sky, the nation feels like it's standing on a thin, cracking sheet of ice. One more wait, one more misstep, and everything will break. You cross the threshold into 1860. And the world around you feels stretched thin, like a drum pulled so tight you're afraid even a soft tap will split the surface. You step onto a quiet street at dawn, somewhere in a border state, where barns, fields, and town squares all seem to hold their breath. It's the year everything snaps, but nobody wakes up on January 1st knowing that. They move through their mornings feeding animals, opening shops, sweeping porches, while you sense the invisible tension twitching like nerves under the skin. You drift toward the sound of campaign speeches drifting on warm, restless breezes. America is in the middle of a 4-way presidential race, the political equivalent of trying to share a bicycle with 3 strangers who refuse to pedal in the same direction. Abraham Lincoln, Stephen Douglas, John Bell, and John C. Breckinridge crisscross the country, each insisting they can calm the storm. Spoiler: none of them can. You float above crowded northern cities where posters of Lincoln hang everywhere. His beardless face strange but determined. People debate his platform in taverns and train cars, insisting he isn't an abolitionist, just someone who believes slavery shouldn't spread any further. In the South, though, you drift through parlor rooms where the name Lincoln triggers reactions normally reserved for jump scares. Whispers build into shouts. Rumors race faster than telegraph wires can carry facts. You hear one planter swear that Lincoln plans to send federal troops into the South on day 1. Another insists he'll outlaw slavery overnight. None of it is true, but fear rarely waits for accuracy. A quirky tidbit drops into your ear. Some Southern newspapers printed their own imagined Lincoln speeches. Just to prove how dangerous he was, fictional lines delivered with absolute conviction. It's 19th century misinformation at its finest. Historians still argue whether Southern leaders genuinely believed Lincoln was an existential threat, or simply used his candidacy as the final justification for long-planned secession. You listen closely from your quiet vantage point and hear the truth trembling somewhere between those explanations. Election day arrives November 6, 1860. You hover above polling places where crowds cluster together, bundled against the cold. Ballot boxes fill, voices buzz. And then, when the results snap into place, you feel the country tilt. Lincoln wins the presidency without carrying a single Southern state, a mainstream fact that echoes through every farmhouse, city street, and legislative chamber. The map divides cleanly, brutally, North versus South, not by intention but by unmistakable political reality. In the North, you sense a sigh of cautious hope. In the South, you feel the air harden into something sharp. Within weeks, mere weeks, South Carolina secedes. You watch delegates gather in Charleston, dressed in heavy coats, hands shaking with excitement or fear depending on the man. The vote is unanimous. Cannon fire erupts in celebration along the harbor. Flags change overnight. The first brick is pulled from the wall. You drift west and south as 6 more states quickly join. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. Each convention feels more dramatic than the last, rhetoric soaring, nerves fraying, tempers boiling. The speeches you hear frame secession as self-preservation, resistance to tyranny, protection of slavery, defense of states' rights. The crowd sways like a congregation convinced the world has turned against them. You can almost taste the adrenaline. But not everyone agrees. In back rooms and quiet kitchens, you hear Southerners begging their neighbors not to leave the Union. They fear war, economic collapse, ruin. They whisper their doubts so softly you have to lean in to catch them, like someone confessing a forbidden thought. Still, the wave sweeps past them. By early 1861, the Confederate States of America forms in Montgomery, Alabama. You hover as Jefferson Davis gives his inaugural speech under a gray sky, his voice firm but uneasy. The crowd cheers anyway, as though volume can replace certainty. Southern pride swells, but underneath it you feel the anxious shifting of a nation that just spun itself away from the familiar. You drift north to Washington, where Lincoln finally arrives secretly, yes. A quirky fact, he traveled in disguise through Baltimore to avoid an assassination plot. You watch him step into the Capitol under clouds so heavy they seem to press the buildings downward. His inauguration unfolds with a strange mix of hope and dread. He insists he won't end slavery where it exists. He begs the South not to break the bonds of union. He warns that no state has the legal right to secede. You sense determination under his calm tone, like steel threaded through cloth. And then you hear a distant rumble calling you eastward, Charleston Harbor. Fort Sumter stands like a lonely tooth of stone jutting from the water. Inside, Union Major Robert Anderson waits with dwindling supplies, surrounded by Confederate forces. You hover above the fort at dawn on April 12, 1861. The sky blushes with first light. Birds circle. Cannons sit still, silent but coiled. Then, like a single match scraping, a mortar shell arcs through the morning and bursts over the fort. The Civil War begins. Cannon fire thunders across the harbor. Smoke billows. Buildings tremble. You feel each shockwave in your chest. Men scramble, shouting orders through the haze. The roar lasts for hours, echoing across water and time. Not a single life is lost in the bombardment, but you know what it means, what it unlocks. The ice cracks, the ground gives way. The fire leaps from spark to inferno. Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion, and the North stirs with fierce resolve. Crowds gather, flags wave, and young men climb onto wagons with more enthusiasm than caution. The South braces, furious at what it sees as invasion, and 4 more states secede: Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee. Richmond becomes the new Confederate capital. The map redraws itself with jagged precision. You drift above train stations as soldiers depart, their uniforms crisp, their mothers crying, their sweethearts clutching handkerchiefs. You glide over towns where people whisper predictions. It'll be over in 90 days. It'll end before harvest. It can't last long, not in a modern age. You wish you could tell them. But this moment, this fragile, roaring beginning, is where your journey ends. Not because the war is simple, but because the road ahead is too massive to walk tonight. You followed every crack from 1819 to 1861, every whisper into a shout, every step toward a nation finally split open. And now the sky dims as you slowly begin to descend. The noise fades now slowly, gently, as if someone is easing the volume knob downward until only a soft hum remains. You rise above the battle smoke, above the trains and crowds, above the trembling map of a country about to enter its darkest trial. Higher and higher you drift, until the landscapes blur into muted shapes, and even the sharpest edges of history begin to soften. Breathe slowly here. The tension you've been carrying loosens, slipping off your shoulders as the sky settles into a calm, moonlit stillness. The harsh lines of the past melt into quieter shades: blues, grays, the faintest silver. Everything that once rushed toward conflict now drifts at the pace of a quiet evening tide. Imagine yourself floating on a warm current of air, the world below turning peaceful and distant. The voices, the debates, the cannons, all of it settles into silence, like dust finding its place on a bookshelf. Your body feels heavier in the best way, as if the ground itself is gently calling you back into rest. The air grows softer, the breeze cooler, the night deeper. Let the rhythm slow. Let every breath stretch just a little longer. The stars overhead shimmer with a steady, comforting glow, each one a tiny reminder that even the most chaotic chapters of history eventually give way to calm. Even nations at war find peace again, even storms pass. And as you drift into this softer space, you can let go of the urgency, the noise, the weight of all the years you just walked through. Let your thoughts settle like feathers drifting to the floor. Let your eyes grow heavy, your mind grow quiet, and your body sink deeper into whatever holds you. You've made it. Rest now.